Und wenn ich im Stadion oder beim Stadion soll, im Liverpool, wenn ich will.
We were just kids let off the leash.
Well, there's all the gangsters, and there's the transvestite, and there's the hookers. It was exciting.
You're in Hamburg, you're 18, you've never been abroad in your life, and you got a bit of money in your pocket, and you go drinking on a Saturday night. But by the time you got to Hamburg, if you got a girlfriend there, she was likely to be a stripper.
The only way to survive in Hamburg, to play 8 hours a night, was to take pills. Like the waiters gave you the pills and drink. I always took more pills and more of everything because I'm more crazy.
Jesus, you look like Marlon Brando in The White One at the time. You know?
What we generated was fantastic when we played straight rock in Liverpool, Hamburg, and around the dance halls, you know.
The Reaper Barn is not a place where young ladies go. You know, it was not a nice place to go.
It was only kind of good, clean fun. Good, dirty fun, actually.
Liverpool and Hamburg had contrasting wars, I would say. Liverpool was the main western seaport, so it was vital, obviously, for shipping through the Atlantic, and so it was obviously going to be a target of German bombing.
Seated on the hood of a touring car, the Prime Minister goes on a tonic tour of the bombed areas of Birkenhead, Liverpool and Manchester.
Liverpool was the second most bombed city in Britain after London. It lost about 4,000 people in those bombing raids.
One of the greatest serial stories of the war, the battering of Hamburg. By night and day, the big German city was subjected to Allied air assaults without parallel in history.
Hamburg was obviously a key German port, very big in the submarine industry. Bomber Harris, he was the head of fighter command. He made Hamburg one of his key targets. And in 1943, he mounted a huge bombing raid in July called Gomorrah, where he bombed the whole of Hamburg.
Neutral sources report that in 8 heavy Allied raids on Hamburg, more than 58,000 people lost their lives and 180,000 lost their jobs.
More people died in that bombing raid probably than in Nagasaki. Hamburg is devastated. Liverpool is sort of damaged, but survives.
Liverpool was the second biggest port in England. Also, it was a very poor city and tough, but people had a sense of humour. And it's where the sailors would come home with the blues records from America on the ships.
Up until that point, it had been sort of Billy Cotton and swing and bebop and stuff, but suddenly rock and roll kind of burst on the scene. Lonnie Donegan was the other big influence. That's what made all the kids buy guitars at the time.
Maggie, Maggie, babe, they have taken her away. She'll never walk down Lodge Street anymore. And that judgy guilty found her, robbing a homeward bound her.
John was on stage with what was then the Quarrymen.
I met Paul and said, do you want to join my band, you know?
And I knew the words to Eddie Cochran's 20 Flight Rock. That meant I was in.
And then George joined.
George is a mate of mine. He went to the same school as I did, Liverpool Institute. And so we learned our first chords together and got the Burt Weedon songbook and learned all the chords, you know.
I suppose the big decision was Mona's, my mother. I'm going to open it as a coffee bar. She wanted a band for opening night. Who did they turn out to be? Quarryman. No drummer, just 4 guitars. Paul McCartney and John Lennon.
The Germans called 1945 year zero because the devastation throughout Germany was incredible. And by the end, you know, there was no water supply, there was no electricity, and it certainly was, nothing was functioning that well for the next, 10 years, really.
After the war, everything was so mixed up in the mind of the people. So the first pimps with the prostitutes were their own wives who doing the prostitute's job, because everybody after the war, they wanted to earn some money. Everything started to begin. 55 new clubs, and there wasn't allowed, they called it beauty dancer, like these young ladies who danced like striptease, but it wasn't allowed. And everything started with the beginning of the rock and roll music.
Rock and roll was real. To me, it got through. It was the only thing to get through to me out of all the things that were happening when I was 15,
And Elvis was one of the first people that kind of really made me take an interest. To me, it seemed like a whole new direction of music. John knew Stuart Sutcliffe, who was at art school with him, who was a very good painter. He won an art prize, and he got 75 quid for it, I think. And we managed to persuade him to part with this and get a Hofner bass. So it became Long John and the Silver Beatles. I remember playing at Jacaranda, I think, downstairs at a club called the Jacaranda.
Lord Woodbine was a very influential person as a promoter. I mean, it was my father and Alan Williams who were taking groups like the Beatles over to Hamburg long before Brian Epstein came on the scene. Beatles would play at the Jacaranda. They played in my dad's club, the Colony Club. They played in the Strip Club. So he was giving them opportunities that practically no one else was giving them.
I knew that they were from the art school. That was Stuart Sutcliffe and John Lennon. John and Stuart approached me and said, "Hey, Al, when are you going to do something for us, like?"
Alan was our manager. Alan was the person that the German people went through when they wanted Liverpool rock and roll groups.
St. Pauli at the end of the 50s, St. Pauli was for elderly people.
Older people listened to that middle-of-the-road stuff we call Schlager in Germany. And the younger turned from swing into traditional jazz revival, then to skiffle.
My thing to remember is that everything started with Elvis, Bill Haley, and Chuck Berry and all these guys. And when Bruno Koschmider opens the Kaiser Keller, then all the people who like to dance, jive or boogie-woogie, they all went there to jive. these German groups we had sometimes, these German singers, I was the one who said to Bruno Koschmider, you can forget that. That is funny, you know, and that is not authentic. And then Bruno Koschmider went to England, and he went to London and to the Two Ice Coffee Bar. And then he booked Tony Sheridan. Tony was the first band, but the second band was Derry Wilkie and the Senior, and Howie Casey was blowing the horn in that band.
So we all piled into cars and drove down to London. Alan, he hadn't arranged anything. He was always winging it, yeah. And we go, did our thing, and it seemed to go well. And then that was when Alan came to say, I just met this German guy, Bruno Koschmider. And that's how it started.
The second invasion of Germany started about 4 years ago. This wasn't a military invasion, but more of a pop invasion of British beat artists. The club owners over here in Hamburg had been looking for a long time for something new to offer to the Hamburg youngsters. They heard from young seamen who had been in Hull, Southampton, Liverpool, such ports in Britain, that an American style of rock and roll music was being played over in Britain by British artists. Of course, it was too expensive to bring American artists from the States, so these club owners decided to import British artists.
When the first English band played in the Kaiserkeller, the people was running at the place. They were standing and waiting outside, but the people were coming.
The Quarrymen had disappeared. Unbeknownst to me, they'd become the Beatles, so-called Silver Beatles. They had the offer to go to Germany. In essence, they needed a drummer. They'd seen me playing drums, and I got a phone call off Paul, which basically turned around and said, Pete, you interested in going to Germany? As history portrays now. That was the start of an epic journey.
What happened was some fellow came home from Hamburg and he wanted rock and roll groups, and somehow he got the idea that they were in London at the Two Eyes, and someone at the Two Eyes, I think, had told him there were also a couple of groups in Liverpool. So Alan Williams became the agent for all the Liverpool groups.
I had a group working there already, and the Beatles had no money. They said, we haven't got the money for the train fare or the boat. And I said, well, OK then. I had a minibus. I said, I'll take you all in a minibus.
We agreed to meet at the Jacaranda in the morning, would have been of the 15th of August, 1960. And going to be on the van were Beryl, Alan and myself, Lord Woodbine, 5 Beatles then. That's John, Paul, George, Stuart Sutcliffe and Pete Best.
He took us in his van, first of all.
Liverpool, 220 miles, and arrived in London. Directly from there to Harwich. Made a 7-hour crossing from Harwich straight across the channel to Hook of Holland. And made our way to Arnhem, where there are hundreds or thousands of graves of fallen soldiers from a famous battle in 1944. After we'd paid our respects there, then it was a direct route from Arnhem to Hamburg.
And dropped us at the club. Thank you very much.